Thank you, Gary. So as Gary said, my name is Brendan. I'm with Orthomolecular. We're a professional nutraceutical manufacturer. Essentially what that means is in the realm of nutrition, there's 100 different companies out there. Our philosophy is we're much higher therapeutic dosing, intended to be through medical minds like Gary himself. You'll see it in your doctor's offices, things of that nature, because we aim to address certain conditions at such a high level, so we're essentially providing you some alternative medicine tools for addressing those conditions without having to resort to pharmaceutical drugs, things of that nature. So we tend to be a much higher dose, much higher quality than what you'll see in typical retail brands, a lot of which is evident in some of the products we're talking about here tonight. But what we're looking at is anybody familiar with like cortisol or DHEA? Have you heard those buzzwords at all? Okay, so some of the hormonal pathways, don't worry, we'll jump in. Okay, so you're familiar. All right, cool. And then we'll be talking about some of the neurotransmitters like GABA, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine's a big one. So we'll talk about how those two kind of intertwine with one another. One's a little below the surface and how it actually affects you, your day-to-day life, and vice versa. So, all right. So what we're going to be talking about is this is just essentially like what goes on beneath the surface versus what happens, just how you feel every day, anxiety, depression, things of that nature. So the four major key stressors, as Gary talked about, these are interchangeable, of course, in how they affect one another. But sleep disturbance, if you're not getting your 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, that can severely, affect what's going on underneath the surface. Inflammation, blood sugar imbalance, how your diet affects certain things. Mental emotional side of things, so how you actually perceive things, certain events that are going on in your life, and vice versa. And actually all four are very much intertwined. So we're going to go a little deeper into exactly what stress does inside the body, but how you feel and how you perceive stress actually has a direct relationship with that as well. Just to point out a quick study, this particular one was done in 2012 on just over 2,000 U.S. adults ranging 18 to 33. It was shown, it might be a little difficult for you to see back there, but 20% actually had severe depression and 12% had severe anxiety. So that makes up almost 1/3 of our entire population is suffering from severe forms of stress. Furthermore, this is just a basic pie chart here, but 20% of those were extremely severe. So if you're in this room and you do suffer from things like anxiety, depression, or a combination of the two, you have a stressful lifestyle, you get maybe 5 hours on average of sleep a night, specifically for maybe younger parents in here, you're not alone. That's the point of this, just to go to show you exactly how many people are suffering from like symptoms. So for that reason, we actually specialize in the realm of stress with a lot of the components that we have here to help address those issues, to help replenish the body and get back to a state of well-being. By the way, if I'm going through these slides at all and there's ever a question, feel free. Jump right in, leave a comment.
How do you get those statistics?
Well, this was polled on 2,000 U.S. adults. So exactly how that was administered, I'm not really sure. Marketing research firm or one of the like. But it's taken with a specific generation in mind, those that tend to be not only a heavy piece of the population, but also those that can be extremely stressed. Young parents are in there, some college students are in there, and then your young adulthood.
I couldn't read the first slide, but that's all right.
This here?
No, the first one.
Oh, the first one. Okay, so if there's this essentially, I know it's smaller, and this kind of goes over our program here. This will also be online as well. So when you get done with the presentation, I don't know, it'll be on the website or?
Yep, hopefully in a couple of days. I just want to go through it, make sure it reads right and it sounds right, and then we'll get it up on our website. Also on the questionnaire, we'll have a stress questionnaire, and I'll have a link on with that, so you should know if you're stressed, but you can look at the questionnaire and say, geez, maybe I am.
All right, so I don't want you to worry about what's going on this chart. You may understand it, but everything else, it's very complex, but essentially what this boils down to is, if you think about this, it's just the precursor. All of your energy going down into, your hormonal energy, I should say, going down one pool. If you go down one pathway or the other pathway, one's geared towards just managing stress, and one is geared towards your sex hormones, or estrogen, testosterone, things of that nature. What you need to kind of rebuild at night, especially when you hit that REM cycle of sleep, things like that. The issue, of course, is when that's in an imbalance, and your body is constantly undergoing stress, it takes away from that rebuilding phase, which can lead to a myriad of issues, whether it's blood sugar issues, further sleep issues, you name it. So the goal really of our whole program is, again, supplement you or help you get back to that state of balance so that these are back in balance. The issue, of course, is when you're going down that catabolic state or you're trying to deal with stress on a daily nature, go back hundreds of years, the way we might perceive just a random event throughout our day is the same exact way that a body would react in a caveman who comes across a saber-toothed tiger. You freak out, fight or flight, and you got to run. So that same stress might happen in traffic. It might happen when you wake up in the morning. You might stub your toe, and all these issues, things that happen 20 times a day, you can perceive that same way as that caveman perceived that tiger. So that being the case, you're depleting all of your nutrients, and you're kind of again getting away from this balance that we're trying to maintain. All right, so this is how it happens over time. Essentially, what that stress hormone is called is cortisol. So when that essentially happens is here in this section is if you're undergoing that stressful event. Again, there's your saber-toothed tiger. So everyone in here has got a metaphor for that, but it shoots up just to kind of ease the body down. It's almost like the firefighter of your body. It's calming you down, relaxing you, and then over time it's supposed to kind of calm you down back to a state of normalcy. Now, if this happens chronically over the course of a long period of time, the more you experience stress, the less able your body is to produce that cortisol or that stress hormone to bring you back down to a state of relaxation. So that's where you see the stage 1, 2, 3, and failure. This is obviously over the course of a long period of time, but when you are undergoing stress that really severely can affect you, over the course of time your body simply can't cope, which is where consultations with Gary or your physicians come into play, is to help address that, see exactly where you are on this curve so that we can avoid getting to that end. All right, so getting into stage 1, 2, and 3 here, just stress. Has anybody ever had stress profile done? Usually they're salivary cortisol tests. No? Yeah? Okay, so you might recognize these charts, but essentially the goal of this is determining exactly where you are on that roller coaster, where you are on that sliding scale. So stage 1 is simply defined as this. Just prolonged increased excitatory stimulus, or stress, to the adrenal glands. That results in increased cortisol, your firefighter, so to speak, and then just the output of various hormones to deal with that stress. Unfortunately, as we talked about, there's that balance that you're trying to maintain, and it interferes with that. The more you're dealing with stress, the more everything's kind of weighed towards that side, and you sacrifice a great deal of benefit to your own body.
Excuse me, Brendan.
Yes.
I have a little bit of stress right now because you're...
I'm in the way. Yeah.
Unless you're pointing to something, you just sort of...
Yeah, you got it. I apologize. So anyway, this is what a stress protocol would look like. And again, you may recognize this. Essentially what this is, and I know it's difficult to read, so we'll make sure this is available to you. If any of you are interested in doing this, this is readily available from a number of labs. Kind of give you, a line in the sand, determining where exactly you are. It's done from a daily basis. You're looking at 4 different points, 4 different stress markers, right when you wake up in the morning, at noon, right in the afternoon, and right before you go to bed. And some of you may know, right in the morning, you're immediately anxious about the day, concerned with what you have to do. You have a list of things to do, and that's actually a similar stress response to seeing that tiger in the jungle. Some of you may notice on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You're go all day, but at night when you try to wind down, you're sitting there tossing and turning and you can't fall asleep. Or even worse, you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep. So all of these things can come into play, and this is just a look. Again, don't worry about the markers, so to speak, but this is kind of how a marker would look to determine exactly where you are on that roller coaster sliding scale. Stage 2, on the other hand, is a little longer along that phase. So this is, instead of being at the top of the roller coaster, your body's been undergoing stress for such a long period of time that you're starting to sputter a little bit. You're not running as efficiently as you used to. This is considered the transitional phase, but it actually could last up to decades. This is where you might feel anxious one moment and down and out the next moment, anxious, down and out, and just bouncing around quite a bit. So you're just at a state of severe imbalance at this point. And again, this is continuously burning through your stress hormone or cortisol. So those levels are impaired at that point. The benefit side of the body, the nutrients and whatnot that you're trying to use, your body's trying to use to maintain that state of balance, or even further depleted at this point. And actually, as you get back to some of those markers where your doctor will tell you exactly where you're at, those will be even more out of whack. And it's pulling away, even further away from, again, your anabolic side of things, how your body rebuilds itself, specifically overnight while you sleep. So this is just how this would look. And again, it's tough to see down the bottom there, but your salivary points are supposed to follow an even curve throughout the day in terms of how much hormones you're putting out. This is kind of bouncing around, sputtering around that reference range. So it's, again, a severe disbalance, or imbalance, I should say. Stage 3 is as you kind of come down the bottom of that curve. So at this point, you've undergone so much stress that your adrenal fatigue, have people heard of that? Okay, so adrenal fatigue at this point is how that's been coined. So essentially, your hormonal imbalance is such that you're not really producing cortisol anymore. Your body's just kind of exhausted. Adrenal exhaustion, adrenal fatigue. At this point, it's a little more serious because you're approaching adrenal failure. You might notice things like depression at this point, difficulty, producing any energy, doing things you used to be able to do at a high level, just because your body's just frankly exhausted both inside and out. We're going to get into a little more of how that affects, the superficial way you might feel, some of the symptoms you might be experiencing, but from an adrenal or a hormonal aspect, you're just exhausted at this point. And again, this just indicates that the third line is what we're looking at here. I know it's tough to see, I apologize, but in this case, you're just kind of flatlining at this point, not really producing too much of the hormones. All right, so getting into the products just a little bit, some of the ways you can help to address some of these things. As I said, we produce a lot of supplements that basically give Gary the tools to address some of these imbalances or some of these deficiencies. The first of which is called Adrenovive. Actually, just pass that around if you will. These are just some of the components. It's a number of different herbs in there. It's got a lot of B vitamins in there, along with a few other ingredients that help to, this is where, again, you're at the top of the roller coaster. So it helps to calm you down. If you're suffering from things like insomnia or exhaustion, or rather anxiety, it'll help to kind of bring you down in a gentle way. Unlike pharmaceutical drugs, which essentially force you into a state, this is actually relaxing your body, working with your normal processes to get you back to a state of balance. The other two, however, actually, if you want to throw these in a sec.
What is that rhodiola, whatever it was?
Sure. So these are actually interchangeable here, but you said rhodiola. Where do you see that?
I thought it was the previous slide.
On the previous slide? Okay, yeah. So this
I
just
pronounced it correctly.
no, you did absolutely. So you have a few components in this: phosphatidylserine, rhodiola, and L-theanine. Essentially, what they're trying to do is not only help you feel better. So again, anxiety and sleep issues tend to be an issue at this point. It helps to relax your mind as well as your body. So you're calming down an overactive adrenal gland.
But what are they derived from? Yeah.
Oh, those are herbs.
From
Herbs.
what-
Yeah, they're called
what
adaptogen
plant?
herbs. It's a variety of different sources. But specifically, rhodiola is an extract from a plant. So it's, I believe is that the name? The genus?
Rhodiola,
Yeah. Whereas L-theanine and phosphatidylserine are extracts, and I could absolutely get you information on that for sure. But it's a combination of like an herbal blend as well as some vitamins as well as some other components that have direct action on hormone production.
I know the other two, but I didn't know really rhodiola. I've heard of it, but I don't know what it was.
So the other two, this is where you're more, again, kind of bouncing around. You might be anxious one moment, depressed another moment, or just flat out fatigued. These two have a lot of similar indications. One actually incorporates a little bit of glandular, so it's going to help to be a little more direct in addressing things, whereas the other one's a vegetarian blend doing the same thing. Again, at this point, you're kind of at the bottom of the curve, you're exhausted, and your body needs resources to rebuild itself. So that's where these come into play to help it do that. Mind doing that? All right, so this, again, is a somewhat complicated chart, but what we're looking at here is basically the connection of what's going on in here versus what's going on in here. This kind of draws the bridge, and again, when you see something or you're perceiving a stressful situation, your body is what kind of pays the price. So some of the things that may happen, for instance, if you're anxious, right? Your pupils dilate, your heart accelerates. It inhibits digestion, so you notice that feeling down deep in your gut, which is typically the first thing you'll notice when you start to feel anxiety or pressure to do something. It actually stimulates blood sugar. So this is, again, getting back to Gary's piece, which will happen in a few minutes, but that's intended to be used for energy. So when you actually perceive something super stressful, for instance, a couple hundred years ago at that tiger again, you need to prepare your body, or your body prepares itself to run away or fight or whatever you need to do. So it releases blood sugar to be able to burn as energy to do that. However, when you don't actually have that kind of physical response, you can really cause a lot of blood sugar issues, diabetes, you name it. So all of these are intertwined, interconnected. The adrenals, as we said before, that becomes an issue. Your hormonal imbalances get all out of whack, and then it releases the bladder too, common symptom of severe anxiety. On the opposite end of the spectrum, basically the opposite of everything we talked about. Contracted pupils, slows heartbeat, stimulates digestion, so you can actually, relax, digest, everything along those lines. So what we're trying to do here is essentially establish a balance between these two symptoms, or these two states of mind. All right, so into the more perceived side of things. So whether you're anxious or depressed, yes?
There's that other kind of energy where the sugar is just from being like ultra happy, ultra excited, ultra...
Oh yeah, for sure.
But that also secretes those same kind of stimulants.
It does. It's just a different way of, I guess it's a different state of mind. So if you're happy or things like that, that's an acute way of, it's a very short period.
You might not sleep because of you're so thrilled about
Yeah, totally, yeah. And that's, you can be in a state of distress, which is bad stress, or eustress, which is good stress. So even though it's two different forms of stress, you might be happy in one case or sad in the other, it still has a very similar reaction within your body. The difference is cases of distress tend to last a lot longer, especially, what we're talking about here, you're anxious about work or what have you, whereas things like euphoria tend to be a little more short-lived. So even though you can't sleep, absolutely right, very similar way that the body reacts, for sure. And that's actually getting into this a little bit. So neurotransmitters here, basically states of depression or anxiety, can be broken up into two categories here. We're looking here at either GABA or serotonin, melatonin, things that calm you down, essentially your stoplight in the body, versus the excitatory side of things, things like dopamine that perk you up. So when these two are out of whack, it can have a severe, create a lot of other issues that kind of what we talked about that happen beneath the surface as well. So essentially how this happens is there's an area called, the neurons essentially just produce these neurotransmitters, and when they're in a state of imbalance, it can create a lot of different issues. Again, this is a great chart, one that you'd have to see a little closer up, but essentially they have to get to their receptor, and if they don't, create a lot of issues. Especially if you're starting to churn through some of those neurotransmitters, it can create a lot of imbalances beneath the surface, which we talked about before. So, all right, so this is essentially just getting into how serotonin is produced, what it does. Essentially, serotonin will help to relax you when you're in a state of stress. It helps to kind of counteract a lot of that anxiety that might come up. This is looking at an overall state of balance. This is actually a better slide to look at. So here you've got your serotonin, you've got your dopamine side of things. When this is a state of balance, you're very relaxed, you're very comfortable. And then, like I said before, when you become too stressed out in one direction or too stressed out in the other direction, not only are you churning through your hormones or your resources beneath the surface, but you can also churn through your neurotransmitters as well, which leads to states of depression, anxiety, or things of the like. Too little excitatory, or dopamine rather, leads to things like fatigue, brain fog, lack of motivation, depression, and then too little on the other side of things like GABA or serotonin, can lead to the lack of ability to cope with stress, agitation, anxiety, insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night, sleep latency, all those troublesome things that are no fun to deal with. So like I said, maintaining a balance between the excitatory side of things and GABA levels, or your stoplight, so to speak, is key in maintaining overall healthy stress profiles. All right. So dopamine, very important for regulating mood, memory, focus. Provides that euphoric feeling, feelings of pleasure, motivation for life. And a decrease in dopamine can actually diminish the capacity to feel joy from life. So, and also things like ADD. Yes?
I have a question from the last slide.
Sure.
You said we should maintain an equal balance between the GABA and the GLUT.
Yep.
How do you measure that?
So this is actually something you can measure in a neurotransmitter test. More often than not, though, it's actually measured via some of the symptoms you might be going through. So there's tangible ways to go about it, but more often than not, this is something that would actually happen when you speak with Gary. He'll be able to identify immediately whether you're looking at more of an anxious state or more of like a depressive state. And when you're leaning one way or the other, it's easy to tell exactly what's kind of overpowering the other or what you might be depleted in. If you're looking for a tangible way of looking at it, similar to the way we were looking at the hormonal imbalances and things like that, those are available as well. But
What types of tests?
so there's a few.
Yeah, the main one is a urinary test. It's a one-catch urine, which will check the neurotransmitters and some of their metabolites. And as Brendan said, for the adrenals, it's a 4-part saliva test. And if anyone's interested, we do have the kits. Insurance sometimes pays for it, but you deal with the lab directly on the payment.
Thank you.
So yeah, as I was saying, these are just the excitatory side of things, the things that keep you up and running. This is kind of a cool look at essentially how these are created. Again, this is something that when you do look up close, they're all intertwined. So that's the goal of this slide, is just to show you that from certain amino acids you actually can produce. Your body produces a lot of these neurotransmitters. So when looking at this, if you're depleted in one or depleted in a certain nutrient, it can lead to a deficiency in these neurotransmitters, especially when you're churning through them at a fast rate. The inhibitory neurotransmitter side of things is looking at just the relaxation, GABA. So it's essentially the brain stop signal, like you were talking about before. Slows down or stops the firing of neurons, which essentially gets you in a state of calmness or relaxation. When this is lacking, issues with sleep, issues with anxiety can arise. So when those are the case, we want to replenish these neurotransmitters so that you can get back to, again, a state of balance, a state of relaxation. Regulates mood, buffers stress, keeps your appetite and sleep pattern stable. And again, a similar way of looking at it, tryptophan here is actually the key amino acid, what you find in turkey. So that's the ongoing stereotype of eating turkey. When you tend to eat it, you get tired. That's because it actually directly produces GABA, melatonin, and serotonin. This is again looking at just depletion, so we can skip through that. But getting into this, essentially how they're intertwined. So this is really what I wanted to get down to the nuts and bolts with, is how not only your hormones can be depleted and your neurotransmitters can be depleted, but how they're interconnected. When one's having an issue, the other has an issue, and how we can actually have a better state of overall health by addressing everything at once. So just, again, connecting the dots. So in the first phase, looking back at just a high amount of cortisol, a high amount of hormones, you're churning through things at a high rate. Typically, you're churning through your serotonin and your GABA very quickly as well. So you're going to be agitated, you're going to feel stress, a lot of anxiety. So what you want to do is ideally address both of those at once. So essentially what that is dealing with hormone production as well as the neurotransmitter aspect. So when looking at those, in this product here, essentially, actually if you want to pass that around too, that's actually got GABA directly in it. So when you're in a state of anxiety, you feel uncomfortable, it works again within 5 minutes. If you have a panic attack or something along those lines, it helps with sleep. In dealing with a lot of those states of just overall stress, overall anxiety, anxious thoughts, issues with sleeping, all those. So again, addressing the hypercortisol or dealing with a hormonal imbalance while dealing with that kind of gives you that fully encompassing protocol. Similar to that case, when you're kind of bouncing around on the lower end of the spectrum, you've been stressed for a longer period of time, you're getting to a state of exhaustion. Typically, depression can be created with this state of hormonal imbalance. So again, we have other tools that we can use to address this state, not only addressing what's going on beneath the surface, but also what's going on in the mind, depressive states, things like that. And then same exact thing here. This is where you're approaching failure. So when you really need some adrenal support, this is where you pull out the big guns, combine those two forms of support, and really address the issue. All right, and then this just goes to show you that all can be titrated up, down, or up several doses a day, or just one, depending on the severity, which again would be more of a Gary area. All right, so just to kind of conclude, it's important that the brain and the hormonal output are addressed simultaneously in order to optimize health. So again, the way you perceive stress, a lot of the symptoms you might be feeling are indicators of what's going on beneath the surface. So the best way to address it is, you can address it either one or the other, but the absolute most effective way is to address both at the same time because they're so closely linked. And then, as I said, hormonal output support in conjunction with your neurotransmitters, how you perceive stress. If you support the two together, it only accelerates healing. All right, so this is kind of getting into Gary's piece here, but this is looking more at how stress actually affects the GI. All right, so how it actually fits into bowel health. So these are some cool notes here. So first, stress hormones actually lead to the release of certain peptides that actually start breaking down certain cells in the gut that contain histamine. So similar to the way an allergy response would be, it can create a lot of inflammation, a lot of discomfort. That's why when you actually feel a little anxiety, you feel almost like a drop in the gut. And this is why individuals with IBS might actually have food sensitivities, things like that, because they're both very closely linked. All right, and then second, we know that an important nerve connects both the gut and the brain. Again, when you feel a state of anxiety, the first area that you feel it in the body is the gut contracting. It actually affects motility of the gut, and the way its muscles contract, leading to either diarrhea, constipation, cramps, things like that. Chronic stress experienced on a daily basis can actually make these symptoms worse and more frequent. But while stress may aggravate symptoms, it does not cause them. So even though you may think you're having an issue with the gut, it could very well just be a stressful situation. All right, and as I said, both are very closely linked, so when you actually perceive stress, you can feel it in the gut. All right, you're up.
And he's not running out, so as we're going along, feel free to ask questions. If I have my card up here, my email's on here. One thing that can be very helpful, there was a Dr. Braverman, and he developed a questionnaire, and I forget how many questions, but as you go through it from your symptom picture and how you react, it gives a good indication as to the neurotransmitter imbalance you could be having. And he did, and we have, and some other practitioners that I work with, we all had a bunch of people do the urine test for about $180 with the lab charges and the Braverman assessment, and they came up almost identical in every single case. So it's a very interesting way to get an idea, get an understanding what's going on, why you're stressed, why you're tight, why maybe you're having REM sleep problems. So that's just a fun thing. I have it up on the website. If you go to our blog, and if you scroll down, it's probably about 10 or 12 posts down. You can find it there, or if you send me an email, I can just send it to you so you don't have to look. One thing I want to mention, we think of neurotransmitters as in the brain, the central nervous system. We use more neurotransmitters, more serotonin, one of them, in our digestive system than we do in the brain. So people who are on SSRIs, Zoloft, Prozac, those type of drugs, they have a digestive issue. And if you talk to most people who are on those drugs or who need them, their serotonin is low. That's why they're on it. And when you start talking to them, how's your digestion been? They haven't been thinking about it because they've been depressed. And you think about the most important thing. But when you start talking to them and they're thinking back, most of them have had pretty bad digestion, either stomach or bowels, for a long time. And if you think about it, life begins and ends in the digestive tract. We, big long tube, we eat all this great food, because none of us eats junk food, I'm sure. And we have to break it down. They're big macromolecules. We have to break it down to little tiny pieces. And that's what we absorb. And we use that, the minerals, the proteins, the amino acids, to make the neurotransmitters, the muscle, the glycogen to feed our system. So if digestion and elimination are off, you can't absorb the nutrients properly you need to make neurotransmitters. And if neurotransmitters aren't being made, digestion's off. worse, and you absorb less, and you just keep cycling around and around and around. This is another reason why sometimes when people take either Prozac and SSRI, or even one of these products with 5-HTP that increases serotonin, they get a lot of GI distress. If you start off with too high a dose, you can get gassy and a little crampy. And that really is, it's not a good thing, but it's a good sign. That means those serotonin receptor sites haven't been stimulated because you're so low on serotonin for so long that when you start making it, they're so sensitive that they over-respond. So some people have to start with a very low dose and work their way up. That's what Brendan was talking about. Some of the doses are 1 to 4 capsules, 1 to 4 times a day. How can you have that big a range? Because we're all different, and we all need different things in different amounts. One of the slides Brendan talked about was when he was showing that all the hormone systems are interrelated, and they really are. When cortisol is too high because you're under stress all the time, they have what's they call now the tyrosine steal. We need tyrosine to help make cortisol, to make T4 and T3, and to make some of the female and male sex hormones. So if you are under a lot of stress, the body takes the building blocks it has and sends it to where it needs it. And that's all those hormone systems. But if you are really in fight or flight, that saber-toothed tiger is chasing you in your mind because of the stress, the body is going to shunt all the tyrosine to cortisol. And we're finding there's a big problem with subclinical hypothyroidism. A lot of people have all the symptoms of low thyroid, and they go to their doctor, and the doctor keeps telling them your thyroid is fine. And yeah, but I don't have energy, I'm gaining weight, I'm not sleeping well, I can't concentrate, my menstrual cycle's off, and all that. And the answer a lot of times after a while is, well, maybe you should see a psychiatrist because it must be on the mental side, not the physical side. When the adrenals are off, your thyroid and women female hormones could be normal, but you could have the symptoms of low female hormones or thyroid or male hormones, because when the adrenals are off, the body doesn't use those hormones effectively. And that's why a lot of people on thyroid, there's a thyroid issue, but the adrenals, they've been stressed a long time. And if you don't address the adrenals, you keep raising your dose a little, you feel better, then you feel hyper. And then your TSH goes way down. So the doctor lowers the dose, you feel good, and then all of a sudden you feel hypo. And you just keep doing this. Anyone has had that or know anyone with their thyroid, they're constantly having their dose go up and down. Another thing that's important, which we all know, is a good night's sleep. When we go into REM sleep, that's when our adrenals are really a battery. You can look at them as a battery. We're an electrical system. That's when we recharge our battery. And if we're not getting good quality and quantity of REM sleep, you don't start the day with a full charge. And that is very stressful. That's why a lot of people, some days, if you had a real good night's sleep, your kids could press all your buttons, and it really aggravates them when they're pressing your buttons on purpose and they don't get a rise out of you. Other days, somebody could spill a little milk and you go off the deep end. And that's when your adrenals are up against the wall. We have our adrenals, we have an adrenal reserve. I keep going back to kids. When you have babies, you don't get any sleep for the first year. Then when they become teenagers, you don't get any sleep for 10 years. But you can survive because you have that extra battery, your adrenal reserve. And when you get a good night's sleep, you fill it up. And that's how you can live without much sleep for a while. But eventually, when you deplete that reserve, you go to the gym and you feel good. You start exercising. And as you start exercising, your mind clears, it forces the adrenals up, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine go up, and you feel great. But if you are in stage 2, what happens is you don't have the reserve anymore. So you're burning up everything you're making, so then when you finally stop exercising, you crash. You have to go home and take a nap. You can't keep your head up. And so if your adrenals are really getting worn out, you don't want to push yourself. You want to feed the adrenals. Give them the building blocks. On the neurotransmitters, if you're not suffering from bad depression, anxious, a little depressed, you want to give the body the building blocks, because our bodies are the best regulators of making what we need when we need it. We can't do that with drugs. We can get a nice steady state, a blood level of a certain drug or a certain hormone, but we can't regulate it. We're in flux. A woman's cycle, estrogen goes up and down the first 2 weeks, progesterone goes up. If they don't get pregnant, it goes down the last 14 days, give or take a couple of days. When we give a birth control pill or Premarin or a hormone, we get a steady state every single day. So you go to the doctor on a woman who's cycling on day 6, and they take blood and they say, yep, your hormones are fine. I don't know why you're having hot flashes. They might be fine on day 6, but what about 2 weeks later when they're supposed to reverse? What if they don't reverse? So we're in constant state of flux. So the best way is give your body all the building blocks it needs so it can make what it needs when it needs it. If you're stressed, you should be able to pump out cortisol. There's excitatory and calming inhibitory neurotransmitters, gas pedal and a brake on the car. What happens in the car if you drive with 2 feet? When I learned to drive, they said you only use 1 foot. Now they're teaching kids to use both feet. I guess they're ambidextrous. It's the craziest thing. Some of the driving schools are saying one on the brake, one since there's no clutch. But if you push the accelerator all the way down, you're riding the brake. What wears out first, the engine or the brakes? The brakes. So what happens? You get anxious, you get stressed. You are right at the edge of the cliff. One little thing pushes you over the edge. And what happens? You have the kid in the store, 5 o'clock, their blood sugar's dropping, excitatory neurotransmitters are through the roof. Mom, I want the candy bar. And mom says no. Kid drops on the floor, yelling and screaming, has an absolute fit. And before I had kids, I saw this at a mall, and I was saying to myself, what a terrible mother. Look what she's doing. And once I had kids, I realized, what a smart woman. She sat down next to the kid, let him have a fit for 2 minutes. He burned off all the extra excitatory neurotransmitters, became very quiet, and looked at her and said, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me.
How many kids do that?
What? Well, some, it's funny. A lot of them will. But then again, we won't blame mom, but it was the mother's fault. It was late, and she should have had a snack, so blood sugar didn't drop. But who knows? But so that is something that goes on. Whereas if the kid was in good balance and his blood sugar was good and his neurotransmitters weren't out of balance, he might have given his mother an attitude, but it wouldn't have been a total meltdown. We have those meltdowns. How many times has anyone in here, after the fact, said, I don't know why I exploded or why I got that angry? That's because the brakes were worn out. So by putting in the right nutrients, you can reline the brakes. GABA is the emergency brake. The gas pedal's pushed down, you're riding the brakes, and you're accelerating into the car in front of you. So GABA comes up, and that helps calm it down. Problem is, when you run out of GABA, you don't have the emergency brake. So you go from stress to anxiety to panic attacks. Another thing that's very interesting is, has anyone worked a night shift? Okay. And was it consistent week in and week out, or was it a couple of days of the night shift and a couple of days of day shift?
Consistent.
Okay, that's lousy, but that's
A little
good.
of everything.
Okay. If you all of a sudden had to work 12 to 8, and you do it religiously, 5 days a week, and then on the weekend you stay on that schedule, you will train your body to when the sun goes down to wake up, and when it gets light out, you get sleepy. That's against Mother Nature, but you can train yourself that way. So on the weekend, you're automatically going to be on that schedule, unless you force yourself another way. Stress is the same thing. If you are overly stressed consistently, and then we click our fingers and send you to one of the tropical islands, and you have your own little hut on the water, and everything's beautiful, you're still going to wake up in the morning, and your body is going to help you, because you're supposed to be in fight or flight. As you wake up, it's going to get you juiced and revved, because that's your norm. So a lot of people say, how come it was so stressful those last 5 months Now it's not stressful anymore. Why do I feel lousy? Because you're still in fight or flight, depleting yourself more. You have to help the body get back to baseline, and it'll remember, that's where I want to be. As we get stuck in what we trained ourselves. So this daily stress that we're all under, the saber-toothed tiger example is great. We were designed for very severe stress, for short bursts. You killed the tiger, it ate you, or you climbed a tree and got away from it. I don't know if saber-toothed tigers could climb, but you got away from them. But it was over in a couple of minutes. Now when you think about it, you get up in the morning, you're thinking about, what am I making for lunch, getting the kids or the husband or the wife, well, we don't get the wives off, the wives get us off to work. So your stress has already started. Then you get in a car. I live 11 miles from here, and it can take me 20 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes to get here. So even if I don't think about it, I have good music, I listen to the radio, you're stressed because you leave an hour and 20 minutes early, and when there's no traffic, I'm upset because I could have sat home and had a cup of coffee and read the newspaper. And if I leave a few minutes late, of course, it's the hour and 10-minute ride, and I'm stressed. I'm going to be late. And don't these people know they're supposed to be somewhere? Why is everyone out there? Then you get to work. I'm off on Thursdays. I love it. I come into work. There's always 40 or 50 emails, 25 voice messages, and that's great. That's good stress. If nobody calls, I'm not going to be here. So that's an excellent stress, but you're stressed. Then I get busy, and people are coming in. That's wonderful. That's why I'm here. But all of a sudden, it's 2:30, and I haven't had lunch, and I ate breakfast at 6:30. My blood sugar's dropping if I didn't eat. That's a bad stress. So my blood sugar's doing this, which gets me all cranked. So depending upon how the day goes and the ride home, by the time I get home, I'm probably ready to tear somebody's head off. And it was a pretty good day, but it was stressful. So you have to look at the good and the bad, and if your body is in balance, it can recuperate from these stressors. When we sleep, that's when we repair and rebuild. Good REM sleep and recharge our adrenals. We're finding now, and I think I know why, but we don't know why, we keep changing when we change the clocks. And now, in the fall, it's like a month later than it used to be. And in the spring, it's earlier, and people are taking that 1 hour, 60 minutes, seems to be throwing off more people's sleep, not just for a few days, but for weeks and weeks and weeks. So there are more people with sleep problems. Then we have sleep apnea. And then we have the husbands are snoring, which keeps the wives up, which then makes them a little shorter the next day, which aggravates the husband, and then we are very good at aggravating the wives. And we just keep building on each other's stress. So sleep and eating, really, digestion, most important. As the chart showed, adrenals should be high in the morning and drop off at night. When cortisol is higher, but in the normal range, we can multitask. Women can keep 12, 15 balls in the air. Guys can keep 2 in the air when we're multitasking. When they drop off at night, you get a little foggy brain. You can't concentrate as much, and you get sleepy. When the adrenals, cortisol drops off, the body and the full spectrum light outside goes away. The retina sends a message to the pineal gland, and we start converting serotonin to melatonin. Melatonin helps us sleep. What if your serotonin is low to begin with? You can't convert to enough melatonin to get a good night's sleep, which then screws up the whole system for the next day. What if it's the full spectrum light that keeps us from making melatonin? What do we do at night? We sit on our phones or our computer screens. And now that we went away from those big CRT tubes, the flat screens have more blue light in them than the sunlight does. So that's preventing serotonin from being converted to melatonin. So we're sitting on our computer playing games, Facebook, what are the games? Candy something on Facebook. Candy Crush, and all that. You have all that blue light coming in. Then you get into bed and you take your sleeping pill because you can't fall asleep. You're inducing daytime. At nighttime is a program you can put on your computer. It's Flux, Flux. If you Google it, There's a few sites. It's a free program. You put in your time zone, and it automatically, when the sun sets in your area, it backs out the blue light and raises the softer tones. So if you sit there at that time, you can see it happening over a couple minutes. But the interesting thing is, if you put it on the computer and nobody's sitting there when it happens, other people in the family, if you ask them, what do you think about the new screen or the colors of the screen, they won't even notice it, because that's the way it's supposed to be at night. And so that's much more calming if you need to be on the computer. But you should shut the computer screen off. You should shut the Kindle off. That's putting out white on the blue light. So that's very, very important. Do we need prescription drugs? Yes. Thank God we have them. Do we overuse them? I'll get on my soapbox. Personally, I think we overprescribe drugs. We have a drug for everything. Whatever your problem is, the answer is a pharmaceutical to suppress or stimulate. Sometimes we need that. That's artificial support. If you have a 3-family house and the foundation is cracked, you put in supports. That's the drugs. But in mainstream, a lot of times we forget to fix the foundation. So the drugs are very, very good. If you fix the foundation, you don't kick the supports out while you're fixing it. You leave them there. You stay on your medication. But if you do fix the foundation, the amount of support you need, so the doctor is going to start backing off the drugs because you're really taking too many for the support you need. The holistic support and the pharmaceuticals, for the most part, can be used together. You should coordinate that with your practitioners. But it's very, very good. Going back to Zoloft and Prozac, they don't make serotonin in the body. They prevent the body or slow down the body from breaking it down and getting rid of it. So these aren't real numbers. Let's say you have 100 serotonin receptor sites, and you need 80 of them to be full of serotonin to feel well. What if you're only making enough to fill 70 of them? Prozac will keep that serotonin around while you're making more, so you can get up to the right number and feel better. But as time goes on, the problem really was you're not making enough. So if you don't fix the lack of production, then as time goes on, you're not going to have enough to do that, so you have to up the dose or add another layer of drugs in. So working both sides of the fence by giving the body the building blocks so it can start making more if it has the ability is really a good therapy, even along with the Prozac. Same thing if you're taking Ambien. Ambien works on the GABA receptor site, and it works for a while to help people sleep, but it's habit forming, very habit forming, and eventually it doesn't work. Your problem isn't that the GABA isn't working well, so you have to put a chemical in there to stimulate the site. The problem is you're not making enough GABA. So how about giving things that are going to help you, one, produce more GABA, but also calm the stress down, get the body, get the foot off the accelerator so you're not using as much GABA to try to put the emergency brake on. Does that make sense? So do we need the drugs? Sometimes we do. If someone has minor depression, there's a black cloud following them, and some days they just don't feel like doing anything, but they can get dressed, go to work, take care of the family, go shopping, but they just don't have that sense of happiness. A lot of times that can be dealt with talk therapy and some supplements. If they're at the point where they're not, need moderate to severe depression, they're not able to take care of themselves. They might be bathing once a week and eating crackers because I have to go to the supermarket, but this week I just couldn't get out of the house. They need to see someone immediately, and pharmaceuticals are very important, again, to stabilize the situation while you fix the problem. So I think, has anyone ever used Rescue Remedy or Rescue Sleep?
Good stuff.
It's a flower essence. It helps with stress. A couple sprays in the mouth. It can be used for pets, for kids.
Pets, really?
Yeah. We're not special. You can even use it for plants.
How's it work on pets?
Same way it works on us. And
Relaxes them?
it can relax them. So if you have an animal that, I don't know about the vet, because I hear cats are wild. I'm not a
I
cat
have a French
person,
bulldog
but
who has
anxiety.
Okay, thunderstorms, or getting in the car, traveling. A lot of times rescue remedy is all they need, and it does, and for us it doesn't knock us out. With the animals, they have very, very good vascularization in the inside of their ears. So some animals, I guess the bigger dogs you can put stuff in their mouth. The little dogs and cats will take your arm off. But you can put it on your thumb and just rub it on the inside of their ears. Their ears are different than ours. So that's excellent. There's a homeopathic blend. If anyone's ever used homeopathy, sleepy time for kids and adults, it doesn't knock you out. It just helps cool things down. So if you can get your adrenals calming down a little, you get closer to falling asleep. Wonderful thing about this and a lot of these products, if the phone rings and you have to wake up, you'll be as exhausted as you normally would be at 3 in the morning if the phone woke you up. It's not a Benadryl or it's not a Valium that knocks you out. So there's all different things. Brendan went over a lot of these products. Another one, when you're stressed, cortisol goes up, insulin resistance goes up. If you are stressed all the time, you're going to eventually have blood sugar problems, hypoglycemia. How many people know someone that if they don't have their snack in between meals or they're 20 minutes late for lunch, they turn into, as a Jekyll and Hyde. That's blood sugar dropping. And what the body does is the adrenals get stressed and you blow up at everyone around you because they're bothering you. They leave because they don't want to deal with you. That eliminates the stress. That's your safety mechanism. Product like Dioxanol, you can look at the ingredients. There's chromium, alpha-lipoic acid, cinnamon bark, vanadyl sulfate. These all help with insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation. For an insulin-dependent diabetic, no. For the person whose blood sugars aren't too steady because they've been stressed a long time, this could be helpful. If you regulate the blood sugar a little better, that can only help the adrenals. It's much less stressful. The adrenals are less stressed, blood sugar regulation is easier. So you start spinning in the right direction. Make sense?
Yes.
Any questions? Comments?
What do you think about L-tryptophan or L-tryptophan?
L-tryptophan is wonderful. It was pulled off the market about 20, 25 years ago. That was because there were two companies that produced the raw material. They were from overseas. One conglomerate owned both companies, and one of the batches every once in a while was tainted. And the conglomerate wouldn't only sell the other one. You never knew which batch you were getting, so the U.S. government said we're not going to allow any in. Problem with tryptophan, it's a huge molecule, and it's poorly absorbed. Tryptophan, the first breakdown that the body does is to 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan. That's much less expensive and much easier to absorb. But tryptophan is wonderful, but you have to be careful. If your serotonin is very low and you take too much tryptophan, you could be, it's not very uncomfortable, but you could get gassy or crampy. But that's a good sign. You know you're making serotonin, you back the dose down and go up slowly. So tryptophan is wonderful. We use a lot of 5-HTP in a lot of the compounds.
L-tryptophan or tryptophan?
L-tryptophan.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's called tryptophan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It only comes one way. That's excellent. The rhodiola, which was in some of the products, an unbelievable product. In lower doses, it's good if you're tired. It doesn't stimulate you. It clears the fog. So around 100 milligrams, I used it when I was going to school while I was working full-time and had a family. But usually you went away for 4 days of 9 hours a day of classes, and after lunch, it was information overload, and you would just glaze over. And of course, I don't know why, but they always gave you a high-carb lunch, which makes blood sugar go up, go down, and you fall asleep. But a dose, just a low dose of rhodiola, clears the fog. In the Soviet Union, they did some studies up in space with their cosmonauts, and they found when they gave them low-dose rhodiola, I guess that's one of the most stressful things to be orbiting around in a little spaceship. They found mentally and physically they were able to do better quality work for longer times. Now, when the adrenals are too high, a higher dose of rhodiola, it's an adaptogen. It helps the body adapt. So if you're too low, you have the ability to bring you up to baseline. If you're really stressed, it'll calm you down to baseline. So that's why the products with the right amount of rhodiola, if you're stressed or anxious, it's not a Valium that you just sit there, I'm stressed, I don't care, and stare at the wall. It cools the adrenals down to baseline if that's appropriate. What if you're being chased by a guy on the street and you just took your rhodiola? You'll push right through it up to the ceiling. You'll go into fight or flight, but then when it's appropriate, it can help you calm back down. So rhodiola, we use an awful lot of. It's a wonderful, wonderful adaptogenic herb. It's one of the most studied herbs out there. So that's been around. L-theanine is an amino acid. It is calming. It's very good for anxiety. It's been used from little kids right up through senior citizens. And again, it doesn't make you drowsy. It just helps balance the neurotransmitters, gets you out of fight or flight. I hope this has been helpful. I'm around. Emails on here if anyone wants to brave them an assessment, by all means, or if you have any questions, you think of anything, let me know. I will be putting on the website probably in a couple of days the whole presentation, all the slides, so that'll be there so you can review it. And when you review it, feel free to call with questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be around if you have any questions.